me stop you right there. What is going on what's the deal with Kazakhstan?
So there was because of budgetary pressure, the government reduced subsidies on certain types of petrochemicals that regular Kazakhs use for transportation and fuel. The price increases were substantial if you were one of the poor in Kazakhstan, which is or working class, which is the overwhelming majority of the population. This led to protests, and the nature of the protests, where they started, who was participating in them, and how they developed is itself very interesting, and I'd like to get back to. But the street fighting in Almaty became so bad that the government of Tokayev had to request support from. He activated the Collective Security Treaty Organization, which has been described as kind of the revival of a Warsaw Pact or a NATO counterpart, Russo-centric NATO counterpart. And now we're seeing that indeed it can operate that way. Those Russian, and not just Russian, troops from other CESTO countries were involved, stabilized the security situation in Almaty. Hundreds of people were arrested and handed the country back to Tokayev. So that's what the fighting was very fierce. The Kazakh government shut down the internet for a few days in order to prevent mobilization, organization, or information dissemination out of Kazakhstan. And now it looks like Tokayev might be able to stabilize the situation. There might be reprisals, there might be concessions, but for me, the most remarkable thing is that we're seeing the Russian sphere of influence operate out in the open through its formalized instruments, in this case, the CESTO Treaty, and fairly effectively. The unrest was put down, and the Russian-recognized incumbent has been secured in this place.
And I would let's go ahead. Sorry, Kuba.
And then there's an entire question of like, where did the unrest come from? How did the protests escalate? Was this a color revolution? But I'll put off to the side. Djene, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a couple of things about context for Kazakhstan for people who are not super familiar with Kazakhstan. So, most people in the West know Kazakhstan from the Borat character, which is kind of like, pretty racially or ethnically insensitive towards Kazakhs. The Borat character.
Oh, it's a horrible minstrel show. Incredibly ignorant, too. He speaks Polish, and all of the Kazakh parts of the movie are filmed in Romania. It's deeply offensive for everyone in the post-communist state.
Deeply offensive. So Kazakhstan is a predominantly Turkic country. The Kazakhs are a Turkic people, predominantly Muslim people, although Kazakhstan itself today has a very large ethnic Russian minority. But since independence and going back to the Soviet era, the apparatus of the Kazakh government has been largely in the hands of ethnic Kazakhs. And you've had this, what you have in Kazakhstan is the elite that kind of led Kazakhstan out of the Soviet Union and towards independence, has maintained control over the country. They've solidified their control in a very effective way because of the oil revenues. They moved the capital city to Astana. They built all these fancy new buildings.
What was the significance of the moving of the capital building?
Well, I think it was moved to a more central location in Kazakhstan, but it was one of these big kind of projects that these regimes like to engage in. And Kazakhstan had good relations with Europe. Tony Blair worked for the former Kazakh president who ruled, whose name is escaping me at the moment, but who ruled since independence, and who basically stepped down in 2019 and handed over power.
Nazarbayev,
yes, Nazarbayev handed over power to a kind of new generation. But again, Tokayev is comes out of a very well established family of literary figures and sort of political figures in Kazakhstan. So you have this political elite in the country that has survived very well on the oil revenues, and obviously has distributed some of that oil wealth to the population to maintain their legitimacy. But of course, with the volatility of commodity prices, that system is breaking down. And you have a large number of problems. You have a lot of Kazakh youth, for example, are leaving the country to go work in Russia as laborers and do low-end jobs there. So there's a lot of sort of pent-up discontent towards this elite, which lives this kind of luxurious luxurious life. So you have a kind of oligarchy in charge of the country, which has been in charge since the independence of Kazakhstan following the dissolution of the Soviet Union, and includes people who trace their political lineage back to the reformist period in the Soviet Union in the 1980s. And I think we're seeing we saw some protests actually towards Nazarbayev, which kind of prompted him to hand over power to the next generation. But it was a handover within this oligarchy towards a new generation. And now, I was talking to our friend of show, Harun, who is not very well, who wanted to join us on this topic. And he said, look, the role Russia is playing here is the role that it played in 1848 in Austria. They're coming in to stabilize an autocratic regime on their borders, to protect their own economic and political interests. And of course, there's a lot of trying to put the Kazakh question into this America, China, Russia Cold War. And of course, there are American factions who are definitely going to try and take advantage of this. You're always going to have some people who are going to try to use these protests to promote a regime change for a more friendly American government. But it's important to recognize that these protests, and perhaps Kuba can go into it, are quite organic to this very specific situation existing in Kazakhstan, whatever the great powers around them do.
Well, let me ask you this question, Kuba. What would be the problem if Russia was to come in and stabilize a place like Kazakhstan?
I'm not necessarily suggesting there is a problem. Mm-hmm. I'm not suggesting that it's fine either. I think that's a question. What I do think is significant is that after a period of American unipolarity, which included the power to sort of set international conditions for the use of force, basically the UN Security Council became the Oval Office. And that type of preeminence, we see that there is, in fact, already a Russian sphere of influence. There is already a Russian security system that can intervene effectively in its neighbors and save favored governments, favored client governments in the neighboring states. And that is a significant development with a lot of implications for how the United States or Western countries or Western leftists should expect from Russia, and the extent to which the current Russian geopolitics is an extension of both Soviet and, even if you go back far enough, Tsarist security concerns. That was an excellent comparison with Russians going into Vienna in 1848. The preoccupation isn't seizing territory. This isn't a land grab. This is what, from a brutally realist, Russocentric position, might be called, looking after your neighborhood. That's one way of reading it. If one feels that the development of a Russian security sphere is some kind of threat to international order, and it very well may be, then it's something that might cause concern, even if the only problem is how other great powers react to that reality being illustrated this way.
watching. Please don't forget to hit like and subscribe on your way out. You can catch the live stream of This is Revolution every Tuesday through Thursday at 6 p.m. Pacific Time and Saturday, 9 a.m. Pacific Time. This is Revolution.